Welcome to Circle of Tone. And that was the first time punk ever hit the masses. New Rose by The Damned. That wasn't obviously the track. That was me trying to recreate the guitar sound. New Rose wasn't a love song. It was actually a song about how much they loved the scene, the new bubbling punk scene. This single came out before the Sex Pistols were even signed. And let's just talk about the Sex Pistols and the absolute unit that album was. Never Mind the Bollocks. I love hearing Americans say bollocks, by the way. It's just one of my little things that I love. If you're new to this channel, and if you're just a little punker coming on in, hello, my name is Owen. Circle of Tone. I tend to try and recreate famous vintage tones. The Sex Pistols, I could not get one thing out of my head when I first started listening to them. I obviously heard the hit singles. I'm 51, so I was way back in the day, a little before my time, when I was a music fan. Adam and the Ants, that was my jam back in the day. And Peroni was a huge part of the punk scene. Marco Peroni, absolute legend. I've done an Adam and the Ants video, by the way, which most of you punk guys would probably like. Why is my title so inflammatory? One thing happened to me. I was a teenager at the time. And obviously, the impact of the album, the Never Mind the Bollocks album, when I was 17, 18, I was into tight thrash, right? And I loved tight playing, and I loved really good solos, and I was all about the technicality of it. And when I heard Never Mind the Bollocks, that was some really good guitar playing, all right? You just listen to it. It's not just a guy riffing, right? There's often 2 or 3 things going on with the guitars, panned left and right.
But he also did slightly different versions of the rhythm, adding accents to it.
Like a bit of feedback comes in on one verse, and then like something else comes in on another. Just the initial track that went down on the guitar, then that would be copied on the right-hand side. So that it wasn't stereo, it was like mono deluxe.
One chugging, one doing ringtones, one doing subtle bends. I just thought, this is really good. I'm going to get into this band. And then I see the headlines, old headlines about the Sex Pistols, where they couldn't play their instruments and there was this and that and the other. I was like, are you kidding me? They can't play. They play amazingly. The bass and the guitars on this album are fantastic. The drums are pretty good, rudimentary, not Rat Scabies level, but they were really good, bouncy. And I listened to a demo or something of, I think it was them trying to play Johnny Be Good. The headlines then synced up. That is the headlines I've been reading, where they can barely play, right? Where the guitars were all over the place and it was just a shambles. And then listening to the album, it's a completely different band. All the footage I've seen of the Sex Pistols live never synced up with what I heard on the album.
Steve Jones was, and still is, about the tightest lead guitarist I've ever heard in my life.
Liar. Let's have Dave Mustaine call him a liar. As time goes on, I forget, it's always just scratched me wrong. Then I start listening and hearing about session musicians, about in the industry, just nothing to do with punk. I thought, I'm not going to get into the Sex Pistols deep like a lot of people did, because there's something didn't quite sit right with me, right? And then I start seeing headlines where Chris Spedding was actually the person that played the guitar on Never Mind the Bollocks. Now, who is Chris Spedding? Let me show you this picture. That's McLaren. That's the rest of the Sex Pistols. And there is Spedding, looking like a part of the group. Now, very interesting things came out. Okay, Spedding said he didn't play the guitars, right? The initial guitar demos of the Pistols were rejected by the label. So in comes Spedding with a new rejigged demo which actually got them signed, right? So from the start, they were rejected. In comes this guitar virtuoso who does the chugs perfectly. He had an old hit called Motorbiking.
If you gotta go, gotta go, motorbike riding. Listen to me and I'll tell you no lie.
And it is, talk about somebody who was steeped in underground culture. The biking culture in the UK was amazing. Mods versus rockers, you know, all that type of thing. Teddy boys, seedy underbelly that a lot of the general public didn't know about until the Mods versus the Rockers headlines came up on where they'd be beating the shit out of each other on Brighton Beach, things like that, right? So I was a mod as well. I've actually been punched. I've been attacked by bikers as a mod. As a Latino, I was like 13 years old, walking across a motorway bridge, and there were some rockers on there, and I had a big hoo patch on my back, and I got punched in the face. He hit like a pussy. I just ran off, but it's like it's probably the weakest punch I've ever taken. So anyway, so Chris Spedding, amazing guitarist, world renowned for using Gibsons and Fender Twins, right? And suddenly, up comes this punk band using top of the line gear, which was stolen and this and that, okay? And or what was the other bullshit? Well, that it was in exchange for, with the white Les Paul was supposed to have been in exchange for a flight ticket or something with McLaren and the New York Dolls management. They never paid him, so he took the guitar's payment, blah, blah, blah. There's all these lies, right, that come out about the gear of the Sex Pistols, like he stole the guitar from Mick Ronson. Jones said that in the past, and then he said, oh, I was just joking. There's so many little bits of winks and nudges. Jones even said this in an interview.
Got to set it straight that Chris Spedding actually played all the guitar on Never Mind the Bollocks. And I don't even know what studio they did it in.
But he's been sarcastic. So he said it in the past that he didn't play most of the guitars on this album, right?
Steve would then build up his rhythm guitars and add some overdubs.
Why are you looking at the beautiful liar meme face of Dave Mustaine right now? I can tell you why Dave Mustaine is looking very skeptical right now. The only overdubs are 2 guitar solos, of course by Steve Jones. That's according to Spedding. So Spedding's version of events is completely different to this guy who's just talking about all these multiple rhythm tracks that are going left, right, up, down. And also this guy talking about the bass.
And Steve just like put this part on that was just like, he's just playing exactly the same thing as he plays on the guitar, but like on the octave down. Having like an E bar chord, the octave below that, that's the whole thing. You know.
It's actually not following the route. It's walking the dog. It's doing all sorts of things which bass musicians do, not some random punk dude. How can you look into the eyes of Dave Mustaine and lie like this? Now, Chris Spedding was a Womble.
The sun doesn't shine and it's cloudy and grey, and it's only the beginning of the wobbling day, and you've got to do the washing up for Madame Cholet.
Right? A session musician. Roots in this hard rock anthem, Motorbiking Dan, which had effects, by the way. So did Anarchy in the UK. It had the MXR 45, or he called it the MXR 90. I'm not sure if the 90, it was either the 45 or the 90. He keeps on going back and forth on that. It's basically a phaser type of a pedal. Let's not get too nerdy on the gear. Maybe I will do a gear video on the Sex Pistols in the future and try and recreate it. But to recreate it, you have to be a really good guitarist. He can't play this music back then, dude. I don't care. Maybe Devil's Advocate, Blackout Drunk. I still sound like me when I'm blackout drunk. I still sound like me if I'm trying to rock out on the stage. It's never that off, right? Devil's Advocate again. The headlines were they can't play their instruments. He's playing shit on purpose to be a punk, right? I don't know, man. And the further claim is that it wasn't Matlock, it was Jones that also did the bass. Now listen to the bass. The bass, it just sounds like a session bass player did that. Do I think Jones played on the album? Yes. Do I think that Sid Vicious played on the album? Yes. Just because you played on something doesn't mean that you end up on the final take. I know for a fact that that producer had Sid Vicious on there, who was in a hospital for most of the time they were in the studio, right? That album got banded between the multiple producers. Spedding was on the scene at the time as well, and it kept getting rejected, remixed, and producer A, producer B, and all of a sudden, this glowing nugget of an album comes out that's like perfection, and it is not rough. Very, very suspicious. If you look at the comments, right, on old, the Spedding tapes or whatever, all of the comments are, is this Jones actually playing? You know, it sound, and a lot of them like, it really, really sounds like Spedding. It sounds like his technique and his vibrato and his nuances, it's little things that he used to do back in the day. And the question never goes away. So we have Jones, who lies over and over and over again, twisting his mustache. I'm not saying, I always say there's not enough assholes in rock and metal anymore. It's all goody two-shoes. I like that. I do think he's punk. I think he's perfect for the band, you know? So, like, the previous bass player that Sid Vicious replaced was way better. He wrote most of the riffs and everything. But they got rid of him for good reason. It sucks. So if they are as superficial as to get rid of somebody because he didn't have the right look, that's not punk rock, man. You know, a lot of the old crossover bands I used to love, like Gangrene, they looked like nerds, man. And they were living it. They were skating, they were doing it, they were drinking, they were all that stuff that makes them true punks, right? But just because he didn't look the part meant that he could not make it to the album stage of the promotion, all right? Sid Vicious just took him up. He could barely play. But that's no news. But Sid Vicious is on the albums. A very small amount of his, the sub-harmonic of his bass is on some of the album. And I think a similar thing happened with Jones. And I think, even if it wasn't Spedding, right? The record labels back then were a lot of musicians didn't even know they got replaced on some of the songs that were put out. Can't explain by The Who, right? And The Who was a big influence on the Sex Pistols. Pete Townsend didn't even play on that single. That was actually a certain guitarist for, who was it, Led Zeppelin or something? I can't remember who did the guitars on that. But I think Townsend did the solo, all right? They also tried to replace Keith Moon with the drummer on that single. And Keith Moon pinned him up against the wall and said, "You go anywhere near that drum kit and I'll kill you." That's punk rock. True punk. You know what I mean?
Is your seat in the upright position? Are your seatbelts fastened? Master of Puppets is sped up. The actual song, not the whole album, apparently.
It's funny, and during the recordings of Never Mind the Bollocks, one of my favourite stories was they were sharing the studio with Queen. So Freddie Mercury was in there, and in comes Sid Vicious, and he made a snarky comment. The famous, "I want to bring ballet to the masses," is one of the Freddie Mercury's big quotes in media. Freddie Mercury just grabbed him by the collars, pinned him up against the wall and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And he called him something like Dave Atrocious instead of Sid Vicious or something like that. It's just like true punk, man. I'm telling you, punk comes in many shapes and sizes, gay or not. You know what I mean? I love it. So I can't. It still doesn't sit with me. The last person to know who gets replaced on albums is usually the people that played on it. Nirvana would say, "Do not double track this. Don't do that. I need a single this." And the producer in the background would go, sure, whatever you say, and would do it the producer's way. All right? So even though he thinks he's keeping it pure and clean and, you know, underground, the producer is sprinkling fairy dust all over everything. Jones might not know, the producers involved may not know, because at the end of the day, the producers come to the conclusion that it was going through so many hands because Malcolm McLaren didn't want to pay anyone, so he kept it confusing with like a smokescreen of who gets paid with the final mix, you know. There's a lot of shenanigans that you went on with punk, including, you know, the famous interview where they swore on the BBC, and that guy was like bending over backwards to get them to misbehave. A lot of shady shit goes on with music when it comes to being spontaneous, all right? There's a lot of art, right? If you want to get really deep into punk, into modern art, is influenced by the government, all right? Certain scenes that pop up in all the big magazines, in all the headlines of The Sun, on all of the tastemakers from the 50s onwards, a lot of them are actually generated by the man, the pigs, all right? So modern art was infiltrated by the CIA, all sorts of things, all of the big names, the big bands, especially in the acid era, like Grateful Dead and everything. It's not as hippie and love and spontaneous as you might think. It just happens to coincide with the government wanting to police these filthy oinks. I'm not saying the Sex Pistols is fake. If I was in my shoes as a producer, I'd do the same thing. Redo the guitars myself. You know what I mean? Say, oh, this is you. And just, I do think Jones played on it. I don't think his is the main riff through the whole album. I think you can definitely hear him on it, but it's too good. A lot of guitarists watch my channel, so think about your first recording session and how terrible you sounded, right? He had one crack of the demo, which was rejected. Then Jones suddenly sounds like a seasoned pro on the album. One of the greatest rock songs of all time. Apparently that's his level now. Who could have done this? You know, a good guitarist, like maybe the person who turned down playing with the Rolling Stones, which Chris Spedding did. Perhaps Chris Spedding, I think Ron Wood ended up with that gig. Maybe a guitarist that stood in for Jimmy Page, maybe somebody of that level could have, you know, created the greatest rock album of all time. Maybe the tightest person in the world was Chris Spedding and not some random punk that was chosen for his looks because he looked like a right hard nut. You know what I mean? Or gab nut.
We need a producer. We need a good engineer.
We need a proper bass player.
We need a proper Right, that is it. I'm off.
And he played bass like sounding like a seasoned bass session player.
Who's that playing bass? Who is it?
I didn't even look at other ones to start picking holes of them. As a guitar expert of the internet's neckbeard when it comes to everything guitar. So yeah, Smoke and Mirrors. I love Steve Jones. I love how impish he is in interviews because he knows it's all bullshit. Alright guys, thanks for watching. And if you like the fact that a Womble started the main punk movement, because even though New Rose was a bit of a hit, the Sex Pistols is what launched punk into the stratosphere because of the headlines, the juicy headlines. My dad's band, actually, in the 70s, shared a rehearsal, a really rat-infested, disgusting rehearsal space. He shared it with the Sex Pistols before they got signed, while they were getting their, basically, development deals. You know, they were getting developed like a K-pop band. He's the scary one. He's the smelly one. He's the anarchist. You know, it was great. My dad's band, Badfinger, they can be accredited for starting a power pop.
No matter what you are.
I want to dig into that to see, because a lot of the lists that come up with the start of power pop, a lot of them mention my dad's band Badfinger as being one of the originators. So that would be a cool thing to dig into. All right, chaps, thanks for watching. If you like these types of vids, you can help out my channel by becoming a patron of Tone. And nobody signed up recently, but Richard P. and Co., you guys up here, legends. Or you can just donate via PayPal, things like that. Just go to circleoftone.com. But if not, just a comment and a like and a share really helps out channels like mine, because the underground helps the underground, and I am the true underground of the neckbeards of metal. I don't know. I've had coffee. All right, chaps. Remember you're a Womble. Circle of Tone.
Remember you're a Womble. Remember you're a Womble. Remember you're a Womble. Remember you're a Womble.
A wolf? A bear?
Womble! And music is the banner! And even when you're healthy and your color schemes delayed, down below those dandy clothes, you're just a shade too white. 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 I feel beneath the white there is a red skin suffering from centuries of taming.
Watch him become a god.